If you're looking for a lens for macro photography, but you also want something that's a versatile walk-around photo and video lens, look no further than the EF-M 28mm f3.5. This is a beautiful little lens, and it works great both for macro photo and video, and just for general purpose photography and video. Now, the first thing you're gonna notice about this lens when you take it out of the box is it is a lot like the kit lens, both in weight and size and build quality. And that isn't necessarily a great thing, but it's not the worst thing ever. And it appears as part of that, they've been able to keep the cost of the lens down. So because of that, it is quite an affordable lens. And I will put some links in the description down below to some current good pricing that you can get on this lens. But the first thing that is really a little bit disappointing about it is the fact that it does have a plastic lens mount, similar to the kit lens. The lens itself, once again, is a very similar size. It's also a very similar weight, which can be a good thing because we know that this size and weight lens sits very well on these EF-M cameras. But the lens does have a few tricks up its sleeve and can do a lot of stuff that the kit lens cannot. And the first thing it can do is obviously take macro photos and videos. And to enable the lens, just like the kit lens, you have to slide the little clip and slide it into position. And it's got two positions that you can use. One is just a normal mode. Now you use this when you're walking around doing sort of normal photography. And if you want to get super close to something and do a super close-up macro photo, then you go, or video, you go into super macro mode. And interestingly, this lens actually allows you to get a 1.2 times magnification when you put it into super macro mode. Now, there's a lot of dedicated macro lenses out there, very expensive macro lenses by Canon and other manufacturers that cannot do that 1.2 times macro size on those lenses. So that is something that's pretty special about this lens, particularly at the price point it's at. And essentially what 1.2 times macro magnification means is that the thing that you are taking a photo or video of, once it is projected onto the sensor, on the sensor it is 1.2 times the size it is in real life. So it's actually bigger, projecting a bigger image, or the image of that thing on the sensor is sort of 20% bigger than it is in real life, which just means that you get a better image and a bit more detail in your image. Now, the other thing that this lens does that, once again, even some of the most expensive macro lenses don't do, is it has a light on the front of the lens. And this is something that Canon has really pushed. I think they might have been one of the first companies to do that. They might be the first company to do this. And this was one of the first lenses. I don't know if it was the very first lens or their second lens that they've done this with, because they got one other lens that does this. And the reason this is important is when you are getting close to something to do a sort of macro photo or video of, what you'll find is that in normal situations, you'll get so close that the lens actually shades the object itself. And that makes it very hard to get a good photo or video. It also creates often a shadow in the image. And they've just overcome this by putting a light on the front of the lens. So if I just click this once, now I've got a light. Now the light has a few different functions. This is sort of the function one. We're in the full brightness, both lights. It's got two different lights. I click it again, and now I'm on half brightness. I click it again, and now it's off. Now, if I actually hold it down, now I have clicked on sort of the one side. I click it again, that's half brightness on the one side. Click it again, we're on the other side, full brightness, and half brightness, and then off again. Now what this does is this allows us, depending on what object we're taking a photo or video of, it does allow us to cast the light in a way that creates the type of image that we want, because all photography is just a matter of painting with light. So you might be in a situation where you just want to flood the whole thing with light, then you just click it and you use the whole thing at full brightness. You might want to dim it down a bit, or you might want the light coming from one side or the other. And that gives you all those controls just with this little button on the side of the lens. And to be honest, when I got this lens, I thought that this was going to be kind of a silly little gimmick, and then you start doing macro photo, even in bright sun in the middle of the day, and you'll find that you use it in basically every shot you do. So it is extremely useful, and I use it all the time because of that. Now, if you look at the images that this lens produces, they are beautiful close-up images. There is plenty of detail, there is plenty of sharpness, And it just produces those sort of magic rendering Canon colors that we are used to. Now, one thing to be aware of is this is a 28mm macro lens. Now, there's a lot of macro lenses out there at a variety of different focal lengths. And what you'll find is most macro lenses are going to be ranging anywhere between 100mm and sort of 28mm, even down to, I think I've seen one as low as like 14mm or something like that. But what you'll find is the longer that focus number, so like a 100mm lens, that is great for sort of insect photography or things where you are going to want to be a little bit further away from the object and still be able to get that macro magnification. With the 28mm, this is quite a wide field of view or quite a wide lens. That means to get that proper macro magnification, you have to get very, very close to the object. So this is not a lens that I would be using for macro photography or video of bugs or something that you really don't have the time to get close of or something that is going to fly away. So because of that, it's not really a perfect lens for that, but it is quite good sort of for flowers, general purpose. I use it a lot for product photo and product video. That's probably my #1 use for this lens is product photo and product video. And you can also use it by putting it on a slider or a dolly and moving it across in front of whatever you're trying to get a product video of, and that creates some really, really interesting, really cool footage. Now, just because it's a macro lens doesn't mean it's only useful for macro, because it can take pictures of things in the distance. It doesn't have to be close to the lens. It can take pictures and videos just like any other normal lens. And when I use it like that, the couple things that I find it good for is just sort of walk around all-purpose photography. It's good for street photography. It is good for sort of family outings and things like that. And one of the important things about this lens is as a native EF-M mount lens, it is the only native EF-M mount lens that has image stabilization in the lens. So if we look at the other native mount lenses, there's a number of them by Viltrox, there's a number of them by Sigma, and Canon themselves makes the 22mm f2 and the 32mm f1.4. None of those have image stabilization. So you are getting a prime lens, a fixed focal length lens with image stabilization. And Canon has obviously done that because it's sort of extremely useful for a handheld macro photography. Image stabilization isn't the end-all be-all in macro photography, because when you're close to something and you're sort of moving, you're moving kind of the whole camera. So it can't fully compensate, but it does definitely make a difference. But that does make this lens the only prime lens that does have image stabilization built into the lens. Now, I think as importantly, we should talk about what this lens is not good for. Because it only goes down to a maximum aperture of f3.5, which is a number that represents how big the opening is in the back of the lens to let light in, the smaller that number, the bigger the opening. The bigger that number, the smaller the opening, the less light that comes in. Lenses on this mount that let the most light in go to f1.4. That is a lot of light. f3.5 is the maximum aperture on this, and that is not very much light. And because of that, this is not a great lens in low light conditions. Now, keep in mind, if you're doing macro photo or video and you're using the light, that will overcome those low light conditions. But as a general purpose photography lens in low light conditions, it's not going to perform very well. And what you're going to get is sort of grainy or blurry or gritty photos. It's not going to take the best photos in those situations. The other thing that number represents, that f3.5, that opening in the back of the lens determines how blurry your background is going to be. So a lens that opens to f1.4 is going to get you a very blurry background. It's going to get you that subject separation that people like for portraits, where the person is sharp in detail and the background is blown out and blurry. f3.5 is not going to do that for you. So if you have a big focus on sort of portraiture where you want that sort of blurry background, that's not going to be this lens for you. Now, as an all-purpose walk-around lens for sort of street photography and family outings though, where you might want to actually have the context, where you've got your son, daughter, friend, family, wife, what have you, often you don't want to blow out the background because you are in a city or you're traveling in a situation where you want them to be in focus, and you want, even if the background is a little bit out of focus, you really want to be able to tell what's there. Otherwise, you could take that photo anywhere in the world and it would be sort of irrelevant. So there are a lot of situations where you don't necessarily want a blurry background. So in those situations, this lens is absolutely fine for that. And those lenses that do get you a blurry background, when you are in those situations, you will generally stop those lenses down and set them to an aperture of f3.5 or f4 or even f8 to get that background in focus. So in those situations, this lens is going to serve you just as well as any of those other lenses because you aren't really taking advantage of that wide aperture and sort of blurring out or blowing out that background. So the EF-M 28mm macro lens is a great macro lens which also has some versatility beyond macro photography. But if you're somebody that really likes to take sort of blurry background portraits and pictures, then I've just thrown a video on screen now, and this is the lens I would recommend for that. But if you're somebody who wants to take blurry background videos and you like a walk around video lens to blow out that background and look really cinematic, then I've just thrown a video on screen here, and I think that would be the lens for you.